So, morning to Croft, and it's afternoon to me, and today is leadership, next to the leadership takeaways with Croft Edwards. Hi, Croft.
Hello, Rachel. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And Croft has his own company, Croft and Company, and he has the LeadershipFlow technique. Did I say that right, or is it flow?
That is correct, yep.
And you have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media who are either avid readers, listeners, followers, and also clients of your LeadershipFlow technique. So I am really, really excited about our interview today, because Croft and I have a lot in common with our coaching, and Croft has a lot to share about how he coaches leadership. So welcome again, and thank you for your time, Croft.
It's great to be here.
Wonderful. So what I'll do is I will kick off on the first element of leadership takeaways, which is what looks at strategy. Okay. And for many people I speak to, we start on the subject of strategy, and it leads us off to many different places. But for you, Croft, what would you say when you looked at leadership and coaching was your strategy in setting up as a business? Because ultimately you're a military background. So how did all the strategy start for where you are today?
Well, I don't know that there was a specific strategy, other than at the age of 8, I read a biography on Omar Bradley, the World War II general, and it really piqued a question in me, which was, why are certain leaders effective? And so that led to off to college. A week after I graduated from college, I was in the U.S. military, where I served 5 years of active duty. And I got out. I knew I didn't want to make the military career. It was a great learning ground for leadership. And after I'd gotten out, I was trying different things, and my sister probably gave me some of the best advice that I'd ever had. She said, go look in your library, and that's what you should do. And fundamentally, I had a very big library. There was history. There was self-help, kind of Zig Ziglar, Tony Robbins type books, and there were a lot of biographies on very successful leaders. So I kind of said, this is what I want to do. I want to study this thing called leadership, but it's not exactly the most common route one can take. And so just kind of stumbled into a medium-sized coaching and consulting firm, and lo and behold, the rest is kind of history.
Yeah. So how long were you in the military for, Croft?
I was on 5 years active duty and then 22 years total. So I stayed in the National Guard and the Reserve, and did it the 2 weekends, or 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So about 22 years.
So yeah, I read on your website you've been coaching in different forms since about 2001.
Yeah. Yep. So I got out of the military in '97, and then I really started in about 2001, and then started my own company in 2005, and have been doing it ever since.
Yeah. So what most fascinated you about leadership back then when you were little, looking at all those books?
It was really just the essence of the individual. Why is it, in using World War II as an example with the book on Bradley, why was he successful but other people not? If you look on the surface, for instance, George Patton versus Bradley, fundamentally very different ways of being, but they both were very successful, and they did it in a different route. So it's just always been this interest of, why is it certain people were more effective? And that led, luckily to me, to the path of learning that I've been on, which is the foundational, which is ontological coaching. And the premise in ontological coaching is how we show up. And it looks at things like how we use language, moods and emotions, how they shape us, and specifically our body, how we show up in a body. Mm-hmm. And that to me is really where a lot of my learning is now, which is how I show up in my body. And a lot of people think, well, I just show up. Well, that is true. You do show up, but how you show up determines what's possible. So a lot of that's where a lot of my learning is now.
Yeah, like now, before this recording, where I was going, my Wi-Fi's not working, and then it's like I deal with myself in my head, like, okay, let's just get on with this interview, because I really want to interview Croft, and now's the moment. So there's so many situations, I'm sure, like that, Croft, that you deal with leaders and managers where there's some stress, there's some circumstances going on. It's just being able to deal with yourself and, like, check yourself. And that's the key, really, would you say?
Well, and most leaders, in my experience, are blind to how they show up. And they're blind to the conditioned tendencies in their body. When my body gets triggered, all of a sudden, however my body is showing up determines what's possible. And so a lot of what I work with leaders on is if I want open conversations, I have to learn how to show up as open. And I've had leaders literally, I have an open door. And my answer is no, you really don't. Because how you're showing up is telling people you're not open to ideas. So that's where a lot of work we spend is.
And it is a new era, because you were touching on this in some of your podcasts, of this whole idea that the leader has to relearn kind of to be more aware of how they're being with other people, and that like really having a focus of, you know, they say the great leaders are all about listening and they want their employees to, you know, lift their employees above themselves. And it really hasn't been that way till now, when there's so much written on it and coaching is becoming so widely available. That it really is about that kind of selfless leadership and coactive leadership, which is Henry Kinsey House and Karen Kinsey House, is all about leaders can show up everywhere if you have the right environment, the right culture. But the leader understanding it's not about the control element of the 1960s, 70s, 80s.
Yeah, and I see so many leaders struggling with this. I've always maintained that one of the, when we truly get good at leadership, i.e., facilitators, coaches, will be out of a job, because ultimately in an organization, the most important person to teach leadership is the senior leader, and they're teaching it every day by their behaviors. So if they come down and they're open to conversations and they're open to finding out the real root of problem, what they're teaching people is this is how we do stuff. But if they teach them, look, don't ever cross me, don't ever do something wrong, that's what they're ultimately teaching.
Yeah, and this fascinated me too. And sort of 5 years ago when I started coaching, was why is this not widely available? Because this is so, this has released my potential. I think this is what you said in one of your podcasts as well, is like the whole point of being human is to release your potential and provide the environment. Why is it not widely coached? But I think there are people who go on courses, but then they forget the stuff that they learn, or they forget to implement it, or the bad habits, etc. So is that what you're finding, that people are doing this stuff, but they're forgetting how to use it?
It's starting to, but it's still a struggle. And I think it's even deeper. One of my mentors, Julio Alaya, wrote a book called a paper on the crisis of the Western mind. And the premise, it kind of goes back to Descartes about the mind is the ultimate. And so we had this assessment that, oh, leaders are thinkers and they solve problems, but it's totally discounted the body. And, you know, we've gone through phases in HR, you know, most organizations, it's taboo to give somebody a hug. What is more fundamentally human than a hug with another person? But we've gotten into this world of, oh, we can't have that. And so moods and emotions, for instance, I spend most of my time in organizations observing moods and emotions, because they tell me what's possible. And the two most common moods and emotions I see in organizations are resignation and resentment. And most organizations say, oh, we don't have time for emotions, unless of course they're positive. So we want all the positive. We want people committed. We want them excited. But then when they show up as disgruntled and angry and frustrated, we say we don't have time for that. And that's a huge breakdown in organizations. And it takes leaders who can deal with their own moods and emotions to deal with other people's moods and emotions. And so that's where a lot of the breakdown is. We have leaders that are emotionally incapable of doing what they need to be doing. And then the organization takes on that role.
Yeah, and definitely I would agree with that. But also there's the other side of, because I think the guy who was interviewing in the podcast said to you, yeah, but surely Croft, it's like most people know what they're doing. So, you know, like, but I think what you touch on is the fact that, and very much from my side, is bad habits, is that we slip back into bad habits, which obviously is generated by our moods and emotions. And very much what I do as a coach is back engineer. So I create the discipline of the new habit, which I know will then generate the new emotions and the new mood, the moods. So I'm back engineering what you're doing. You're kind of coming at it from what moods and emotions are there. I'm coming at it from what behaviors can we instill would be those of the leaders that would then create your moods and habits that would keep the cycle going. So then you're feeling good because you're doing the right things that's getting the results. So It's people slip into these bad habits and don't realize that they're in the bad habits, and then when they're not getting the results, they whine about it and complain about it and blame somebody else. So
Yeah.
We're kind of coming at it from similar aspects, but as I'm generating it from the behavior, which obviously would then create the moods and emotions that you're talking about. So
yeah, and the premise of Leadership Flow, fundamentally what I'm saying is I think we've been doing leadership wrong. The old belief is leaders get results. And I'm coming at it from this perspective. A leader's job is to tap flow. It's to tap what's great inside of a person. And if I become so alive and so invigorated as an employee, the other stuff's actually relatively easy. Because now when I get a team of people that are committed to a vision, they're excited, they want to be here, they're going to give all that energy. So I think where leaders are dropping the ball, they have this view that, oh, I got to get this thing across the end. I say, no, figure out how to motivate your people, find out what makes them tick, and get out of the way. And the more we can create flow in other people, the more that'll generate results. And we've all been at organizations where when morale starts to tank, productivity goes down. When morale is good, when we're excited, when we're committed, when we're energized, when we're really there, that's when great things happen. And I think that's the role of a leader.
Yeah, and you were saying also about have a challenge, because there's a lot of mundane tasks out there which has people's morale go down. It's actually about challenging people to invigorate them.
Yeah, so Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the original researcher on flow, one of the things they've identified in the study of flow is there has to be a challenge commensurate with the skill level. And an example would be when I'm a 3-year-old, 5-year-old kid, learning to ride a bike is a huge challenge. And so kids, you'll see them and they spend all this energy to get to that next level, and then they just take off and, oh my gosh, my daughter can ride her bike everywhere. But at some point, if there isn't a higher challenge, she's going to start to get bored with it. And so imagine if we taught a kid to ride a bike, but we put limits on the bike. It could only go 5 miles an hour. It couldn't do X, Y, or Z. All of a sudden, the kid would initially want to ride it, but then they would stop because there isn't a challenge. They would get bored. That happens with so many employees. And you could say, well, there's still the mundane work that needs to get done. Yeah. But do it in a manner where people go, you know what, this is mundane work, but it gets us to some place. And that's what the search for leadership flow really is how do I, as a leader, bring out flow in people? Because again, if flow is happening, all I got to do in some respects is get out of the way as a leader. Yeah,
and that's very much, I think both our coaching was talking about finding what people care about, because if you can link, and that's like my very first slide on my training workshop is what do you care about? Because if as a coach we can link what people care about to the company culture and the goals, you're there. Because it's matching.
I see this a lot with organizational safety programs. And a fine example, so I work a lot with mines. And one of the rules, and it's a mandate, you have to wear safety glasses. And so what happens is the culture becomes you must wear safety glasses, you must wear safety glasses. And so people start only following the rules. And one of my clients we started working on, and it was fun. I took some of the safety people and I said, so let's talk about why. Let's talk about why people need to wear safety glasses. And ultimately, the conversations we would have with people is, I can tell you, I can force you to wear safety glasses. And if you don't, we're going to write you up. And if you do it 3 times, you're going to be out of a job. But that'll only create compliance. Instead, let's have a conversation about why I need you to wear them. And then we would talk about their family. And, you have grandkids. Do you want to never see your grandkids again? Right? And the reason I'm going to ask you to wear safety glasses is for them. And do I have your permission? Once they've kind of started to have this conversation, I would ask, do I have your permission to hold you to this standard? And almost every time it was like, not only that, I'm going to hold you to the standard. Yes. Every time you see me, you'll see me wearing my safety glasses. because it was connected to their care. They were working to take care of their families, their kids, their grandkids. And now safety glasses aren't some burden. They're a way to make sure every day for the rest of my life, I get to see my kids and I get to see my grandkids. And once that's ingrained and the challenge is tied to the care, again, it's just getting out of the way. But the challenge with this organization was that most of the leaders had extreme difficulty in actually talking about what they cared about. It's like, oh, well, we can't talk about that. And you could see them physically get uncomfortable to talk about. But one-on-one, if you talk, why are you here? I'm here for my wife, for my kids. Great, let's have that conversation with your whole team. Now it's not a dictatorship. Now it's a commitment as a team. So that's really where we tried to go.
Yeah, it is linking the hearts. People, I think, I don't know whether this came from the Industrial Revolution of, oh, my job is just for my money and but it's like linking your heart to your job. And like you say, kind of going, well, where else in your life do you resent being told what to do? It's like, are you going to be empowered about this and choose responsibly that you committed to this job, so therefore you have to wear the safety glasses as part of the job. You don't like it, then move somewhere else. But where else in your life do you agree to stuff and then behind it resent all the rules and actually don't play ball? I mean, how's that going to show?
And they don't even have these conversations when they hire somebody. Right? Imagine the power if I, as the senior leader of the organization, say, and here's some things, you're part of our team, but I need a commitment from you as a team member that you're going to wear your safety glasses, and here's why. And you and I are going to have this conversation now. And if you can't commit to this and you can't look at me and go home and tell your spouse and kids this is what you're committed to, then maybe you shouldn't be a part of this team.
And you know, this is a thought I had the other day because I read every day, and I'm sure you do as well, just to keep learning. And I had this thought that, and I'm sure this must have been written about somewhere, that the organization as a whole is kind of seen in a parental way. People kind of relate to if you work for a big company, they relate to it like a parent, and like, oh, I just got to go there because they're making me do it. And it's like being able to unhook that whole kind of thinking to actually go, you're choosing this job because you want the money, therefore you have the respect. You know, it's always been like in society, like, oh, you know, the company's a bad thing and they make me do stuff. Well, actually, they're giving you some money so you can go home and put food on the table. So, and I think Marshall Goldsmith kind of talks like this as well. It's not what your company can do for you, it's what you can do for your company.
Yeah.
That's not out there right now. And I think it's turning that on its head. Would you?
Yeah, and I think, you know, a great place, if you look at professional sports, for instance, they tend to practice for hours, you know, 5 hours, 10 hours for every hour they play a game. Well, most businesses, we practice for 3 minutes and then we play the game for 40 hours. And we need to, in organizations, we need to have different conversations. And I challenge organizations, the more we practice having conversations about how we have conversations, the better we're going to get. And, you know, some of the initial feedback I'll get is, well, we don't have time to practice. Okay. So how are we going to change your culture? And the only way we're going to get good as a team is we've got to literally step into a gym or a dojo, whatever we call it, and start practicing. And if we are weak in this area, we're going to have to develop it. And for a lot of leaders, this is a challenge because their leaders are saying get results. And their leaders are saying get results. And the market is saying get results. And organizations aren't willing to say, look, we're going to get results, but we're going to do it this way where we have a culture that can adapt to anything. Because that's the beauty. The more we practice this, then when these big changes come that we're not prepared for, we may not be prepared, but we're so much more adaptable to the change, accepting the change. And again, it goes back to conversations and leaders' ability to have effective conversations. And conversations are not just words, they're moods and emotions, and they're the body. And so if we want to have an effective conversation as a leader, I've got to practice that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And the thing is, I didn't used to read books before I did coaching because I couldn't concentrate. And I don't know whether I'm slightly dyslexic or whatever, but I would read a page and then lose concentration. And this is just about the way I learn. And I learned to learn through Audible, so listening to books.
Okay.
But every day I am listening or I'm watching a podcast, you know, or I've got a podcast on, or I'm watching a YouTube or whatever. And I could not do without that every single day of, like you're talking about, you know, constantly being able to examine our conversations. I do that in my head by listening to other people and listening to what works, and then think, oh, you know, how could I better what I do? I just couldn't survive and be the quality coach I am if I wasn't doing that. And people always say, read books, and you always think, oh, for goodness sake, and I find it boring. Well, find something that's interesting. But I don't think people maybe make enough of a point of this. Is I think if we're not doing that, we're dying, because as humans, we constantly do need to be in the uncomfortable zone of pushing ourselves. Right?
Yeah, I struggle a lot of times when I'm working with an organization. I'll say, as part of the conversations, a lot of times when we do we call them leadership dojos or leadership conversations. When we get together with a leadership team to start working on it, there's always homework. And we do that for two reasons. One is we start to have conversations about how we're looking at homework. And so one team, for instance, we made a commitment as a team to change it to fun work. and so we started doing that. But one of the things a hurdle we had to get over was this mindset that I'm at work for my 8 hours or whatever it is, and reading is not part of my job. And I will say that as a leader, it's actually one of the most critical things you do. And so if you're not putting time to practice, what are you teaching other people? And so we are the sum of our practices. So if I practice being overwhelmed and, oh God, I don't have time to read, I'm going to get good at it. But if I practice, and every day, maybe it's 5 minutes I do. Okay, great. If you can practice 5 minutes, then you can extend that to 7 minutes. And then you can extend it to 10 or 15. But what's going to happen, the more you read, the more you practice it, the more you're going to find ways to create capacity, to expand your capacity. And all of a sudden, you're going to read 30 minutes a day or an hour a day, and you're going to get more done anyway, because you're learning things. But that's hard in most organizations, because we have this mindset of, I go to work to work. And, you know, it's the learning organization that we're trying to create, where learning is a part of our culture, and it's a critical role of leaders.
I love that, the learning organization. And to be honest, it's time is not the thing here. I don't have enough time. It's creating the space in your thinking to go, this is a priority, therefore I will make it a priority. And as your coach, I'm going to tell you it's a priority. If you want to get results, or if you want to have a great life and be fulfilled, because you say it's not about the results necessarily, it's about the state and having a great family or having what you care about, then read, because I cannot, you know, emphasize it enough. And you make the time. If you're on your way to work, in the car or walking, put your headset on. There is time that you just need to utilize better. Yeah,
and I see you know, team meetings where we spend the first 10 minutes, you know, talking about last night's football game. Well, where on our calendar do we spend 5 minutes talking about, here's a methodology, here's a model, here's a skill we're developing? So let's talk about it. Let's talk about when we've done this well, when are we not doing it well? And most staff meetings, team meetings, I very rarely see them where there's actual learning going on. And so learning becomes when we hire a consultant to come in and, you know, force us to take 2 hours out of our day, or 8 hours a month, or whatever it is. And so we've already created the outcome. And we practice. Oh, that's great. We practice for this 4 hours or 8 hours in a classroom, but then I go back to the real world and I don't practice anything. And leaders, if I want to get good at having conversations, every meeting I can practice having better conversation. And it's just a skill that I have to get good at practicing. And so one of the things we really, I'm a big component of, is practice. We are our practices. And how I brush my teeth is a practice. And that will determine how well my teeth stay healthy. Because if I only brush my teeth for 10 seconds and I'm done, guess what? My practice is setting my teeth up. So it doesn't matter what I'm practicing. I'm always practicing.
Totally. One quick question before I move on to strengths and is, do you set measures when you're doing your coaching and consultancy? Because I get it's about getting the flow, and you said if you get the flow, then they'll get the results, definitely. But do you set some sort of measures either for yourself or for the people that you're with, so that they know they're getting somewhere, although they can feel it and see it? And how would you say that the culture changes, and how do you measure that?
So I would say there's a correlation between the clearer we are with the outcomes we want, the more likely we are going to get them. A lot of leaders struggle with that, because I think a lot of times they come to me and go, okay, Croft, tell me what what does success look like? And I'll say, I can talk about what I perceive, but the question I'm going to challenge you with is, what do you want success to look like? Because it's not my culture, it's your culture. And that in itself is what you as leaders should be practicing anyway. So what we do a lot of times, we come in and we start the leadership conversations. One of the things we start practicing is, what does success look like? And it is so interesting to see the team struggles with what success is, because we don't want to say what success is. We don't know how to say it. And then the next meeting, we didn't do our homework. We didn't practice. And we look at everybody and we go, well, we need more accountability. Great. What does accountability look like? And then they do it again. And so the struggle is always, it goes back to the self-mastery piece. The struggle is always myself. If I'm the leader of a team and I want to hire a consultant to come in and tell me what success looks like, I'm already failing. I have to, as the leader of the team, say, this is success. And I'm going to hold us to a standard. I didn't say I'm going to hold us to perfection, but I am going to hold us to practice and get better and keep practicing and keep going. So that in many respects, we don't necessarily set, okay, here's the 5 things you're going to do, but it is, you as a team have to start saying, what does success look like? Because if you don't do it, how can we get there?
And for you, what does it look like? Do you physically see organizations change over 3 to 6 months, and people start to just walk around with smiles on their face, hold their shoulders back,
what I'm really looking for is conversations and moods. Because I can sit in a meeting and I can see an effective request. We can break it down. There's a listener, there's a hearer, there's a conditions of satisfaction to a standard of a community. There's a specified time for fulfillment. It's made in an effective mood or emotion for both the speaker and the hearer. We can go and we can explore those things. So I'm looking is, how effective are the conversations and how effective are the moods? But a lot of times we've got to first of all train, what does it mean to have conversations, and what are moods and emotions? So one of the things we do a lot with leadership conversations, excuse me, is we get into a room and we start checking in with, what mood are you in today? And it's always interesting, because the answer at first is like, I'm good. Because, oh my God, I don't know how to say this. I hold them to a standard. One of the standards is, you can't say good. I want you to start identifying what mood or emotion you're in. And if you're in a bad mood, say it.
Yeah.
Because one, that is a process of being a leader, to say, I'm struggling right now. And it's helping your peers to go, wow, Croft's struggling. I need to have a different conversation with Croft. And as we start to get better, it's interesting, because the moods start to expand, and the moods also lead to different conversations. Because invariably somebody will show up and say, you know what, I'm completely not here. My spouse is sick, or my mother just died. All of a sudden, oh, we can have a different conversation, because you're saying right now you can't give 100%. And if I know that as a leader, I can say, okay, great. What do you need? How can I help you get through that? Well, it goes back to care then. Now, all of a sudden, we're starting to talk about what people care about. And I've been in organizations where they've had fatalities at the organization, and they literally talked about it for 15 minutes, and then that was it. Well, guess what? If we can't talk about somebody dying in our organization, how committed are people going to be for this organization? How likely are they going to go to you, their boss, and say, hey, there's this issue, and I want to bring it up because I think we can get better? They're not. They're going to go, oh, I'm not touching that. And it becomes a downward spiral.
Yeah, and you can actually be effective while still being under duress, under stress, stuff going on at home. You can still be effective. And like you say, there's just this one view of you're either happy or you're sad, but you hide the sadness. We don't talk about that. We just talk about, which is ridiculous. It's about authenticity. So I'm going to move on and. Just very quickly, as part of the leadership, we look at the strengths and weaknesses. What would you say have been your main strengths that have armed you, Crofts, with your business and what you do?
I think adaptability. I work very hard. I live in so many different environments. So I have clients that are coal mines that I literally have coached frontline supervisors at 3 o'clock in the morning on a working coal mine face. As the machines are going, we're looking at leadership, but I've also been in boardrooms, on the 8th floor kind of thing. And so it's the ability to adapt and show up in that environment. The U.S. Army Special Forces has a kind of a motto called going native. And the way they look at it is when they go into another place, they take on all the customs of that organization. So for me, a big strength is it has been my ability to go into the organization. And like I've said, I can sit in meetings and you won't know that I'm not part of the team. I'll dress like they do. I'll talk like they do. I'll be a part of their organization. And I'll do it in a manner where all of a sudden they kind of forget I'm in the room and they start having the conversations that they're going to have anyway. And I'm just, a lot of times it'll seem like I'm just sitting in the corner on my iPad. What I'm actually doing is I'm blending into the wall and just listening. And I'm watching, oh, there's a missing conversation between those two. Oh, those two people aren't getting along. And it opens up an ability for me to watch. So really the versatility, and I think that's been a key piece in my success.
Wonderful. And the third part is we look at resources as well, which is what would you say are the main resources that are important to you to allow you to effectively run a business, be a coach, be a leader?
So first is a very understanding spouse. As a coach, it's very entrepreneurial, and there are times when, holy cow, I've got more work than I know what to do with. And there are other times where, oh gosh, am I going to even, make it through the day kind of stuff, right? And that's the life of an entrepreneur. So my spouse has a very stable career. She works very hard, but she's been great. And it's hard on her because she does not have an entrepreneurial mind. And so that's been a big resource. But I get so much of my strength from my wife and my kids. And the other thing, it kind of goes back to flow. I make sure I keep, I don't want to use the word balance, but more harmony. I do woodworking. I'm a marathoner. I have a lot of hobbies. And even on very hectic days, I always make time for those things because I want to stay grounded. I want to stay centered. So it's the versatility and then the ability to keep grounded and centered, which is a practice.
Yeah, because you touched on in a podcast I listened to about the body being so important, and I think we are just starting to realize that as humans because we're living a lot longer now. But really, like you say in your interview, it informs the mind how the body is, and they both inform each other. So it's so important, like to do your marathon running, etc., things like that.
Yeah, right now it's a little side note. I'm actually struggling with my running, and I've been very aware with that. And what I'm realizing is lots of things are happening in my personal world. We've moved cross country. We're rebuilding a house. The business. I've gone from having my main focus being clients to writing the first book, doing more keynoting. And what I realized was my body was saying, you need to slow down a little bit. And so what used to be, I'd get a 5, 6, 7 mile run in. Now I'm struggling to get 2 or 3, but I'm allowing myself to just go, okay, this is where I'm at. My body's saying you need to work out a little bit less, maybe do something else, try something different. Because what I've been noticing was I wasn't finding flow in running. So I've stepped back and said, okay, so let's explore that and see what my body's telling me and just listen to it. And what'll happen will happen, but it'll guide me the direction I need to go.
So great, listening to the gut. And the fourth part is our insights. Where do you get your main, what informs you, Croft, on a daily basis?
So it goes back to my background is ontological coaching. So it looks at how we observe the world. So a lot of my awareness comes from my body, from moods and emotions, and the awareness that the world is not how I see it. The world just is, but how I see it is based on the observer I am. And so just as easily as I can look out and go, oh my God, here's the 10,000 reasons something's not going to work, I can also choose, here's the 10,000 reasons it will work. So it's allowing my body and moods and emotions to guide me so I can be aware of, oh, how am I showing up? How am I observing this? How would I like to observe this? And real quick story, one of my main clients last late July, all of a sudden they said, hey, corporate wide, we're cutting out all consultants. And I went from a very busy end of the year and a very busy plan 2017 to they were gone. And so I wrote a book, and that's where the book came from was, okay, I've got time now. What am I going to do with that time? Am I going to sit here and go, oh gosh, I lost this client, or take it to the next level and write a book?
Wonderful, because your stepdad was something about, because somebody was asking you about how you deal with clients, and I think he was asked the question, that was it, why he was always in such a good mood, and he said because he had a difficult life, and he
yeah.
And he said, well, because no one's shooting at me right now, so that's why
I've been in Vietnam.
Are you still there?
Yeah, so that's what I try to look at things. I have a master's in U.S. Civil War history, and I realize it could be a lot worse. I've got food, I've got a place to sleep, I've got my 2 arms, 2 legs, my brain. So pretty much everything else is a gift.
Yeah, for where you put your focus, basically.
Yeah.
And very quickly, just to round off, future-wise for you, Croft, I know you were talking on a previous interview that you were looking to maybe write a book on leaders mastering themselves in this whole world of uncertainty. The first place we can start is with ourselves.
Yep.
Is that book on the horizon then? Is that?
So well, the first book touches on that. The first book is called LeadershipFlow Perfectly Square. So it looks at leadership flow, but the Perfectly Square, it's a narrative, and that's the name of the company in the book. And it looks at the leadership flow methodology at its core, which is self-mastery. And the premise being that as leaders, we're creating our reality. And if we don't see ourselves as a leader, that's the reality we're creating. If we're seeing ourselves as leaders that can influence things, that's the reality we're creating. So that's the first of at least 3 more books, and they'll all build on that premise.
Wonderful. And I would suggest people go read that. And that book is out now. People can go buy it.
It's going to be out. It's out on Amazon Kindle right now. And it'll be out May 15th, 2017 on Amazon, Target, Walmart, Amazon UK. So it'll be available worldwide then.
And usually I don't do an advert for people, but I am strongly relating to everything you do, Croft, because having listened to your podcast, talked to you now, you are a great coach, and you've got some really wise words to say. And I was learning some things from your podcast. So I would definitely recommend that to people. And
thank you.
And it has been an amazing time. I want to speak more to you, and I know you've got to dash off, but thank you so much for your time here today, Croft. And
yes.
It's invaluable.
Thank you, Rachel. My pleasure. Anytime.
And good luck with your more books to come. You said you've got 3, and we will speak on social media. Okay. Thanks, Rachel. And how can people get in contact you if they want to get in contact? My website is www.croftandcompany.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Croft Edwards. I'm the only Croft Edwards you'll ever find, or LinkedIn. Wonderful. Thank you, Croft. Thank you, Rachel. Have a great day. You too.